Right, welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you joining me again today in a session where I actually reach out to top producing agents and I kind of dig a little bit deeper, pull back the curtain and find out, how did they do it? Are they let's call them a robot that's got a human skin on the outside and we kind of think they're human, but in fact, deep down, they are some kind of alien from another universe. Well, that is exactly what we're going to try and find out today, because joining me today is another ICON agent, which is an amazing achievement, either grossing 3 million Rand in commission or selling more than 35 properties in a 12-month period, which is a very big tick box to actually go and have. So joining me today, it's the one and only Leza Ford. Leza, how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you, Stuart. We have a bit of a drizzly weather outside, which is nice, some relief from the hot weather we've been having.
Yeah, it's always nice to have those cool weathers because it actually helps you to think. So let's dig into a little bit about Leza. And I really want to start pulling the curtain back here. Who was Leza before real estate? Were you kind of dropped off by a special spaceship? Or is there a genuine human being that started before real estate? Give us an idea.
So, Stuart, when I finished school, I moved to Hillbrow in Johannesburg and started my career in the bank. It used to be called Barclays Bank in those days. I spent a year there. I did not enjoy the bank at all. I found it very, very slow. And I joined SA Phillips for 3 years, which I loved, and was exposed to the data division, the medical systems, and it was just a lovely company to work for. I then got engaged and I had to move to Palabora, to the hot place in the Limpopo province. And I started, oh, sorry, there's such a noise outside. I started as a confidential secretary on the mines, and I had a fantastic mentor who used to come and actually irritate me in those days and say, Ford, why don't you stop partying and study? You've got so much potential. So one day I decided to take his advice and I started working my way up through the ranks in the human resources department. I did my national diploma in personnel management, and I became the personnel superintendent on a copper mine in Palabora. And I was then selected to lead a project team to implement SAP throughout the mine, specifically in the human resources division. So working in that environment and being involved in wage negotiations, being involved in, I used to do the mine salaries from top to bottom. I learned a lot of skills working on the mines and was exposed to so much, which I'm ever grateful for, which I think has stood me in good stead for what I'm doing today. And then when I decided to move back to East London in 2005, where I grew up, and I had owned quite a number of vacant stands and enjoyed property. So my mom is the one who suggested that why don't I give real estate a try. So I was lucky to work in an environment where there was a gentleman who was a qualified valuator, and he took me under his wing. So he taught me how to value properties, the correct way of how to do things. Am I waffling too much? Must I continue?
No, keep it on. This is so great because it's actually showing that, there wasn't a spaceship. In fact, you spend a lot of your time in Palabora, which I think is a little bit of an alien town for most people. But it actually shows that, and there's two things that I've actually picked out on this, is you actually had mentors. mentors that helped and guide you. So I'm very intrigued to hear about the mentor with evaluation. Tell us more about that, because this is really the start of your real estate journey. How did that build?
So I think my mentor that I had on the mine, I have the greatest respect for him. I went to Palabora 2 years ago and went to visit him. He's now 72 years old. And whenever something great happens, like when I became an ICON agent, I sent him the article. And he was so proud. He said, Ford, you haven't reached the summit yet. You're still on your way up to the top of the summit. So I'm ever grateful for him. And then for the gentleman that I worked very briefly for in East London, who was the qualified valuator, also an elderly gentleman, but just having that opportunity to work with somebody who understood how to value a property just it stood me in so much good stead. You know, one thing I hate is when agents go into a property and then the seller says, so how much do you think my property is worth? And I just go, I have no idea. I don't work like that. I need to have the facts before I can give you a proper valuation. So also after working for East London Estate, the property place that I worked for was very brief. It was only 6 months, because they still took photographs with a camera and went and had them developed at the Photoshop, you know, for your listings. And I just thought that was absolutely bizarre. I cannot work in a place that's so backwards in that aspect. I was actually approached by Chaz Everett, who were opening a branch here in East London at the time. And they gave us great training. We had a 2 weeks training course. You had to pay for it, of course, where they taught us everything, you know, how to just really the whole broad spectrum of what it is to be an estate agent. And I think that training also stood me in good stead. But I only worked for them for 18 months. I think I was used to being my own boss, coming from the mining environment. And I didn't like being told what to do. I didn't like to go to a meeting and being shouted at, because I just thought that there was a way to do things and a way not to do things. And I live in a seaside village on the east coast of East London. I was taking my children to school one day and I said, what do you think if mom opens her own business here at the center where I am? And they went, Mom, go for it. And they were still in primary school. So yeah, that was what I did. And I opened my own business in March 2006. Yeah, so that's my background.
Brilliant. And, you know, this actually just validates that, one, you weren't dropped off by a spaceship. But, you know, everybody that I speak to, especially the top performing agents, there is some common elements that always come together. One, they've got their entrepreneurial spirit. But two, there's always this little dabble of a mentor, someone that they've actually looked up to, someone that they've learned from. And the saying that I always share out, nobody succeeds alone, is so true and valid in the journey that you've actually had. Even if it is just, you know, talking with your kids, should mom open up her own office? And they're saying, yes, there's the support that actually comes into it. Now, you've gone through this entire journey. And, you know, coming from the mining environments, then going back to East London, getting into the real estate environment, opening your own agency. I mean, that's the best world to be in. What inspired you to then move across to eXp?
So I think, Stuart, I was thinking of immigrating to Portugal a couple of years ago because both my children live abroad in different countries of the world. And I really don't have any reason why I have to stay here in East London or in South Africa. And my son really wanted me to be closer to him. He lives in Switzerland. So I started looking at properties and I, funnily enough, came across Lisa Boyson, who I contacted because there was a property that I fancied. And she asked me, what do I do? And I said, well, I'm an estate agent. So she said, well, geez, that's fantastic. Move here and you can join eXp. And I went, well, what's eXp? I've never heard of them before. So she gave me a bit of background, and I remember I still sent an email to Robin to ask her about it, but I just thought, okay, well, this doesn't really mean too much to me. And it took me a period of 3 years from that first time of actually speaking to Leza about eXp. I mentioned to somebody one day, and they went and did some research and found some videos online about eXp. And I think the one that impressed me the most was the title was "Why Not to Join eXp." And I loved that. And that got me curious to go and see what it was all about. And then Lisner came and did a presentation on AI at attorneys' offices in East London, which I attended. And I was actually furious because I thought that I was invited under the wrong pretenses. It wasn't about AI, it was about joining eXp. But nevertheless, I then really gave it some thought, and my current sponsor spoke to me. And I said, oh, I have a problem. What about my rentals? And she said, well, there's a solution for that. And she set me up with a Teams meet with James Conyers. And then she arranged, or first it was Steve Johnson who suggested James Conyers. And after speaking to Steve, after that meeting, I then decided that's it. I'm not even going to think about it anymore. I love what he's told me. I am looking for a way of how to get out of having my own agency with the rising costs of advertising, the yearly audits for your trust account, and then just having to be this FICA compliant all the time. You spend your life filling in forms and having this plan and that plan. And so I'm actually not selling property. I'm really become a glorified admin person. So that in a nutshell is why I decided to join eXp.
And this is something that I hear so too often. The independent property agency owners, they always have that same struggle. They've become professional admin people. And that's exactly what eXp has actually done. With all the bolts and all the systems and tools, you can actually still operate the way you've always operated, just without that headache of those expenses, those audits, those papers that you have to fill in all the time. I know all about all of that. So this is this particular headache that actually moved away. So now let's get into your business. Now that you've got rid of the headache of being an administrator, so no longer a professional assistant to yourself and to your business, now you're in the real estate space, which is giving you a little bit more freedom to do what you actually love doing, which is helping owners sell their properties and finding properties for people they want to buy. But let's talk about productivity, consistency, and the biggest element here is properties. Getting listings. In order to become an ICON agent, you've got to sell listings. You've got to sell a number of listings. It's not just a few. 35 and above, you really got to start getting those numbers in, which means you've got to have a book that has got a lot of listings in. So how many listings do you on average keep active in your portfolio? Let's start there.
Well, that's a very interesting question. I haven't looked lately, but I would say that I probably have 40 listings at any given time. I need to go and have a look. I was actually thinking about that this morning when I was thinking about this interview today, but I would be lying if I gave you the exact number. I do remember when I filled in my form and they asked you, how many listings on average, do you have? And I remember putting in 45. So it's probably a good number for me.
Absolutely. And here's something that's common. There's two types of highly productive agents. There's highly productive agents that work on a low volume, 12 to 15 listings. And then there's highly productive agents that work on 40 listings. What's the difference? Well, the difference depends on the area. For anybody that's actually watching this, you get agents that will work in an area where it's a very high turnover. these are the areas that are high in demand. So there's a very high percentage of turnover. You'll find that the productive agents have a lower quantity. But in areas where vast, I mean, I'm going to say East London has a turnover of properties, but it may not be as high as some of the areas in Cape Town or in Johannesburg. So quantity of properties must also be quality of properties. And I know a number of agents out there that 40 number, it's always a magical number, having those 40 listings. How do you maintain them? You know, you've got so many different sellers that you're busy working with on a random basis. How do you keep in contact with these sellers to make sure that they don't turn around and say, Lisa's just not giving me any service? What type of system do you use to make sure that you have that communication with them?
So thanks, Stuart. I'm very lucky in that I've had one development with vacant stands. So the numbers are not great in terms of when you sell one of those stands. The Western Cape agent will probably laugh. But you know, the values can be anything, or they used to be 250. Now the cheapest one is about 300,000. So I think having that, so when I say I have 40 listings, I probably have more than 40 listings if you had to take the number of stands in those developments. So I think I've been probably selling those for about the last 4 years. I'm nearly at the end of that. And then I was very lucky to get another development where there was 12 vacant stands that have now been converted to people that are going to put up businesses. They're in a good location. And funny enough, the other day I thought, wow, my plots are coming to an end at Bonds of Views. I've sold all 12 of those others. So what's next? So I know I'm waffling a little bit now, but I was approached last week by a seller who, one of the guys from the development recommended me and said, you know, she's great. We tried to sell those plots for such a long time before, and if you want your plots sold, get hold of her. So I've been very blessed, and I'm going to get a new development. It's only going to have 9 plots, but still, I mean, it's great. It's a nice project. I think also because I've been in the area for a long time, I see a lot of my sellers and buyers. I'm not always very good at giving feedback every week or after every viewing that I've had. I must say that's something that I'm aware of and that I can improve on. But I think, you know, I generally keep in touch and chat to my sellers on a regular basis. And I suppose, you know, you form a relationship with your sellers, and they kind of get to know how you work and how you are. But yes, I think that's one area that I probably could improve on, is giving the feedback.
Well, one thing that you shared was having a developer making a referral to another development. And this was going to lead me to the next, is how you finding new stock. You know, I know for a number of rookies out there, that is the biggest daunting task in their business, is to find new stock. Now, yes, having developments it's always great because it's multiple units. So you're actually getting stock that comes in. But just as you mentioned, you sell out on a development, what is next? And it's that next that has a level of fear for so many agents out there. But you've actually just answered the question for me, but you can elaborate a bit more. You actually have a deep relationship with the developers, with the sellers, with the buyers, that you're not responding to them immediately straight after a viewing or every week, but you've got a relationship with them that builds up the trust of who Leza Ford is. Is this one of the strongest methods that you have to find new listings that comes into your books?
I think trust is a you know, you hit the nail on the head. Also, you know, people talk, and how you conduct yourself in the industry, how you present yourself, you know, I think your professionalism, your authenticity, and then, you know, I'm just trying to think of the right word that I like to use. Ethics, you know, I think ethics are so important. If you don't behave in an ethical way, it comes out, and people chat. I live in a very small community. So if you do something good, if you do something bad, everybody knows about it. I always say that I don't want to walk down the aisle in the local spa where I live and have to dodge somebody, whether it be a buyer or a seller. And I've always stated that. And then, a lot of my clients that I have, I'll give you an example. I had a gentleman who bought 2 properties from me in the village that I live in, and he comes from King Williamstown. So I asked him, Dave, what about your property in King Williamstown? He said, no, I've got a number of properties in King Williamstown. I said, well, who's marketing them? He said, no, the local agents, but they don't do a very good job. I said, well, give them to me. He said, you're prepared to travel to King Williamstown? I said, of course I'll travel to King Williamstown. It's 45 minutes, it's not that far. So that's kind of how you get other business. So I take it on. And with that, I've just got more and more and more property being given to me in King Williamstown. So much so that I think I've upset some of the King Williamstown agents, but that's fine. I'm willing to do the work, getting the property sold. And I think for listings that you're talking about, I think pricing is so important, Stuart. I've been kicked out of 2 homes where people asked me to do valuations, and I went back with my values, and somebody said, get out of my house, Okay. And then a year later, that same person phoned me and asked me to come and sell their house. And I said, well, only if I'm going to sell it at the price that I suggested before. So I think, consistency, you've just got to keep going. You've got to plod at it. I think I might be going off the track.
Not at all. This is one of the best things about these sessions. It's actually about, as I said, it's pulling back the curtain and allowing you to actually relax and share your knowledge, your experiences, which is so important. I can tell you, people are sitting on the edge of their chair listening because it's so much wisdom that's actually coming out. Now, you actually touched on something, which is having a seller kicking you out of the house. Why? Because, well, they wanted 20 million and the property's only worth 15 or 1.5 million. They always feel like it's over the levels. And you had that particular mentor, even if it was only for a short span of time, the valuator, that helped you to do that valuation so you understand how to do it the right way. But there's always those sellers, just like the ones that kicked you out of the house. How do you handle them? The ones that come with those objections of, but Lisa, I'm only going to give you 2% commission. Or Lisa, no, I don't like your valuation of 2 million. I want 4 million. How do you handle those particular clients?
So I think the one thing I like about working for eXp, when I worked on my own, you could say, oh, well, okay, I'll drop my commission, but the minimum I can do is 3%, for instance. Whereas now working for eXp, you say, I'm sorry, but we work for 5% plus VAT. And then if you have to go down, you can go down. What I do tell them when I get a mandate, is that 5% plus VAT, but if it comes to the time when we have to look at an offer and it's not kind of where we are, I will look at my figures, and people kind of trust me on that. I don't put it in writing on the mandate, and I think mandates are so important. I don't like to work without a sole mandate because I believe sole mandates just give you some peace of mind. You don't have to be looking over your shoulder all the time, because selling property is a cutthroat business. I don't care what anybody says. Agents can be something else. So just having a mandate, just if you can't get to the viewing at 4 o'clock this afternoon and they phone your competitor, at least if you have a sole mandate, you can control that whole situation. I think the other thing is when doing evaluation, when a seller asks me to come and sell his property, to be honest with them, I think is of utmost importance. So if he tells me he wants 4 million rand for his property and I think it's only worth 3 million rand, I'm going to tell him that. And the reason why I say that is because he's going to ask you in 6 weeks' time or 3 months' time why you haven't sold his property. But you can refer him back to the conversation that you had where you told him that his property is only worth 3 million rand. You've overpriced it. It's shop soiled. You know, and I think you also have to be able to back up when you give a seller a value. You have to know the area that you work in. You have to know how much property is valued at per square meter and how you got to that. So I think that is important. I always show my sellers how I got to the value, why I got to the value. And yeah, that's really how I work.
Absolutely. You know, and this is another key of a high-performing agent. Sole mandates, without a doubt. Without a sole mandate, you're literally just dead in the water because anybody can sell it. And it really does burn your time. But another factor is your knowledge. We want to be regarded as property professionals. And as a property professional, well, you need to know the area. And then we get that wonderful little slogan, area expert. And I absolutely love that term because when I ask an agent, well, tell me what makes you an expert, they're not too sure. Well, if you're a top producing agent, you will know why you are an expert because you have the knowledge of the area. You can break it down to the value per square meter. These are all of the little things and then rebuild it up to that particular price. I always believe that a top producing agent, in fact, is an educator of the industry. They teach their clients. The more you teach your clients, the better the outcome's going to actually be. So, Leza, over the years, you've worked with a number of agents. You may have agents in your team, when you're at the agency, working around you, mentoring them. You always come across the new rookie agents. And I know when I work with rookie agents, they always ask me, Stuart, what is that magical little action that I can take that's going to give me the best results? And there isn't a secret formula, but there's always tips that we can share with them that helps and guides them in their journey. So what would be your 3 tips that you would share to a new or low productive agent to get into productivity? What would be those 3 tips?
Yeah, well, I think I'll touch on a little bit more than 3 tips, but I think the first one is if you're going to join eXp, do the Stuart Hyslop training. That kind of just kickstarted me back into, it just got me grounded after having my own business for so many years, and little things that you forget about, drawing up a budget, having a plan, having a look at how am I going to get there? How am I going to achieve that? What money do I need? I think if you're starting in the industry, it's very hard. It's, you know, you might not get any money for such a long time. Those 12 properties that I was talking about earlier, I sold them 2 years ago. They only materialized in December this last year. So, you know, you don't know how long it's going to take for something to happen. And yeah, I found that your training just grounded me again and put me on track of where I needed to start. And I always talk about my Excel spreadsheet. So I think I created my Excel spreadsheet then and then when I was actually doing your training. And I think, you know, you have to decide if you become an agent, what area are you going to start in? It doesn't help to work the whole of Cape Town, for instance, or the whole of East London. You first need to decide where you're going to work and become an expert in that area. Understand what are the values in that area. I think that's important. I work all over the place now because I can. I've had years of experience, so I understand, you know, what the values are in the different areas. But you, as a rookie, you need to start in a specific area. You know, one of the things that helped me when I started my career with Chaz Everett was I used to knock up 72 on-show boards on a Sunday. And it was just, even if it was vacant stands, just to start, just to get my name out there, my branding out there, and people start noticing in a suburb when you have 72 boards out, on-show boards. Wow, who's this person? What is that all about? I hate show houses. Let's be very honest. I hardly ever do them anymore, but it was great for me to get into the industry. And I think, you have to do the work. You can't become an agent and think it's just going to come to you. It is a 7-day industry. It's not a housewife. A lot of housewives think that it's just going to be something easy. It's not. It's being consistent. It's showing up even when you don't feel like it. It's cold outside or it's raining and you think, oh, really? I could just stay at home. Yeah, and I think, do rentals, procurement rentals. eXp has the platform for that because that's another way of getting buyers and eventually sellers, because I found that a lot of my landlords became my sellers and a lot of my tenants became my buyers. Yeah, and then I think look for a good mentor. I think it's important. It's okay to sign up people anywhere in South Africa or whatever it is. But if you're a candidate agent, you need to have a good mentor that's going to be available, that's going to teach you, that's going to take you to listings, that's going to show you how to value a property. I don't know. For me, that is most important.
Absolutely. And I love the way that you've put that all together, to come from training and knowledge. And thank you for those kind words. Training and knowledge is so, so important because it builds your self-confidence. It brings you up to another level, making sure that you've become focused, not a shotgun approach. Don't look at a map of an area and think, I want to hit that area, that area, that area, that area. Focus on one and become a master in that particular area. That's how things will actually start to grow as you're actually building in. Having mentors, making sure that you're actually active and not actually thinking that you're a housewife who's going to make a massive amount of money, because this is the easiest industry in the world. Leza, I want to thank you so much for coming into this particular session. It's always nice to be able to pull the curtain back and get to know the person behind the name, the person that receives an ICON award. Any final thoughts, comments from yourself?
Stuart, the one thing that I think is very important is listening skills. I've found that over the years, I would take on an agent or two and you go with them. They don't listen to what the clients are actually saying. They're so busy just, waffling away. And even with your sellers, when you're sitting down and they're going to entrust you with their home, I think it's important to be able to listen. I think it's important to also be able to adjust your conversation to the type of client that you're dealing with. If you're selling high-end luxury and you're selling a house to somebody who's just buying their first home in a lower sort of area, you need to be able to manage that and adjust your conversation accordingly. I think that's one of the important things for me. And I think it's attainable. I think anybody can get there, but you just have to work hard. It's not easy, and it's not luck. It's really work, consistency.
Absolutely. It's not luck. It is that hard work, that consistency, having all of those little attributes that were shared in this particular session that will actually get you on this journey to becoming an ICON agent. And I know that each and every one of you can definitely get onto this particular path and achieve that particular status. Leza, again, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know how busy you are, and especially having shorter weeks at the moment. I know that you're going to get out there and smash it. We're looking forward to seeing you in future sessions and up on stage receiving another ICON. Get it to that double ICON. I think that's going to be an amazing one.
I will be getting that. My target is May.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. She hasn't even thought, well, is it possible? She has just stamped her approval by saying it will be May. I look forward to seeing all of that. Guys, thank you so much for coming on to this particular session. Look out for more sessions. I've got more ICON agents coming up and top producing agents. Each one of them, I pull back the curtain, find out Are they really a human being? Is there something special that they're drinking? And you'll get to find out that, well, they are normal. And they're actually the ones that's going to help you to go forward in your life. So from myself, Stuart, I want to thank all of you for coming into this particular session. So do look out for those future sessions. It's a cheers for now.